On behalf of the SATAA, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar, and particularly our presenter, Samhita Arni. Sam, I know you as Sam because you've had the pleasure of you being in the educational TA group last year. It's a fascinating topic that you're bringing alive for us, rewriting the cultural parent, and the importance of the stories that we have around crafting our identity, and how the opportunity to tell new stories can invite something. Your title is Liberating Identity, and what power there is in stories. I'm sure you've all read Sam's bio in the blurb. I'm not just going to reread that. But Sam, at heart, is a writer, a storyteller. I think your first book was written when you were quite a young girl child, 10, 11. You have, as I know you, you've got a passion for women's voices in the world as well. You work in organizations in India, really impacting the culture there. So we're really excited, looking forward to you taking us on your journey and entering the story with you in whatever way you invite us to. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you all for having me here. I feel very privileged to be here and sharing some thoughts on this, especially with people who are much more advanced in TA than me. So I would also like to offer that as a part of a thing. If you feel that there is another way of reframing or restructuring, please just interrupt and do let me know. My first request is actually to know a little bit about all of you and what might bring you here. Just very briefly, what might have attracted you to this particular session, or if it's just curiosity, I would really like to know. Any volunteers, or can I use my Ravia, please, will you please start?
Hi, I always end up going first. So my name is Ravia, and I am joining you from The Hague in the Netherlands. My background is I'm a mix of Lebanon and Ghana culturally, but I have a British nationality. And my interest in this, maybe it's obvious when I tell you all these cultures that form who I am. At this moment, I'm working with someone, and there are lots of stories around shame connected to illness and disability in certain cultures. And I'm curious to explore that area and how we can change that narrative, because I feel it's very wrong. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravia. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I connect also with that multicultural aspect.
I'll follow. My name is Sophie. I am calling from Nairobi, Kenya. And I am very interested in your invitation to think about the cultural parent. Recently, I've been writing a book chapter that is about to be published about education and at the age, and really relooking at the contamination of the cultural parent, especially the Western cultural parent, in the context of East Africa. So I've been already doing some thinking around that. So I'm really looking forward to continue engaging around that topic. Very happy to be here, Samhita.
Thank you, Sophie. Sarah, I see, yes.
Yeah. I'm joining from France. I'm training with Karen right now in the TA Foundation year. And I'm joining because I'm very aware that I'm very unaware about cultural biases. I'm French and German, half-half. And I was very curious about this aspect of the cultural parent and how to maybe rewrite it.
Thank you.
Okay, I can go next. My name is Priya. I'm from Bangalore, Samhita. Just a little background. So I've done my CTA in psychotherapy, and one of the key things that I was drawn to about this topic, and thanks to Diane for also alerting me, is I'm a big culture buff. A large part of my corporate work was to do with culture and change. And then I took the road less travel. I switched to psychotherapy, which is a big part of my TA journey. And right now I'm training, this is my third year in Jungian analysis. So I'm training to become a Jungian analyst, and myths, symbols, cultural artifacts are a big chunk of the work that we explore. And the other interesting thing is I've just recently, last month, submitted an article for the SACHTA, the South Asian Journal of TA, on the cultural parent. So cultural script, it's called The Scripted Selves on the Feminine Psyche in India. So I'm all ears. I'm very curious and completely wanting to know what you are to offer today. So that brings me here.
Thank you. Thank you, Priya. And I am a little overwhelmed seeing Diane Salter is here. Since I have been reading
It's
your
not
work.
to frighten you. Hi. Yes, well, this is, am I frozen or you just frozen? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. This is a topic very close to my heart. Was always very interested in Pearl Drago's work in particular. And, you know, for me, one of the key questions is how do we retain the best of our cultural parent, respectfully honoring it, and at the same time dismantle that which is getting in our way. And from an African perspective, that's also very important, as I know it is in India. And so I'm all ears.
Thank you, Diane. I have to admit that I've also snuck in a reference to you and your work on spiral dynamics in the presentation. So please,
Great.
if I got something wrong or you disagree, please let me know. Yeah.
There are so many ways to look at spiral dynamics. I'm sure I will enjoy your way. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'll go next. I am joining this call also at Diane's prompt, and I'm very happy to be here. I think from my side, I'm just curious. I work in research and policy and finance and financial reform change with climate change and all of that. And so I suppose I'm looking mostly for, on one level, inspiration, because I think when you're driving processes of change, the front door is not the only door to go through. There's different ways to bring about a process of change, but also the stories, using storytelling as a means. I know I have a cultural bias, so listening to Sarah, I think we often polarize our biases and not always aware of them. I definitely have one, and I think it's important for me to be conscious and aware of that and understand it in terms of situating myself so I can be more open-minded. So thank you for this time.
Thank you, Chantal. Great. Andrew, yes.
Yeah. I suppose from my side, the cultural parent is something that I think I only know sort of at a peripheral knowledge, and it's always been something that I constantly write down to go and read more about. So this is what my big driver of being here, is to jump in and get to understand it a bit more.
From my side, as a white South African and growing up in apartheid, really mindful of where I am, how do I position myself now, and also working multiculturally online for quite a few years, enjoying the learning around holding different cultures, and really interested in how Trudy Newton has linked the learning embargoes with the cultural parents. So that's where my thinking is at the moment, how we can see the cultural parent impacting learning as well. So really curious.
Thank you all for sharing. And I think one of my first invitations is for this to be more of a co-creative learning space, because I also see that so many of you are bringing rich bodies of knowledge and lived experience. So what might be some instincts or some ideas on my part might really benefit from you bringing that here, if that's all right with you. And then to get started, I thought we could start with a story from my culture. And let's see if we can unpack a kind of a cultural parent from that story. So are you ready? I'll share the story as well, so you can see it. And I have problematically perhaps asked AI to help illustrate the story so that it brings certain images to mind. So that is also kind of a collective cultural parent that might be present visually also. So this is a story from my culture. Sorry, I'm actually struggling a little bit to see. Let me just move things around. And yeah, it's a story from my culture, and it's a folktale from my background in South India. It's a Kannadiga folktale, and it's a story about a housewife. A housewife knew a story. She also knew a song, but she kept them to herself, never told anyone the story or sang the song. Imprisoned within her, the story and the song were feeling choked. They wanted release, wanted to run away. One day, when she was sleeping with her mouth open, the story escaped, fell out of her, took the shape of a pair of shoes, and sat outside the house. The song also escaped, took the shape of something like a man's coat, and hung on a peg. Her husband came home. Just going to. Her husband came home, looked at the coat and shoes, and asked her, "Who is visiting?" "No one," she said. "But whose coat and shoes are these?" "I don't know," she replied. He wasn't satisfied with her answer. He was suspicious. Their conversation was unpleasant. The unpleasantness led to a quarrel. The husband flew into a rage, picked up his blanket, and went to the monkey god's temple to sleep. The woman didn't understand what was happening. She lay down alone that night. She asked the same question over and over. Whose coat and shoes are these? Baffled and unhappy, she put out the lamp and went to sleep. All the lamps came to the temple when they were put out. Used to come to the monkey god's temple and spend the night there gossiping. On this night, all of the lamps of all of the houses were represented there, all except one which came late. The others asked the latecomer, "Why are you so late tonight?" "At our house, the couple quarreled late into the night," said the flame. "Why did they quarrel?" "When the husband wasn't home, a pair of shoes came into the veranda and a man's coat somehow got onto a peg. The husband asked her who those were. The wife said she didn't know, so they quarreled." "Where did the coat and shoes come from?" "The lady of our house knows the story and the song. She never tells the story, and she has never sung the song to anyone. The story and the song got suffocated inside, so they got out and they've turned into a coat and a pair of shoes. They took the revenge. The woman doesn't even know." The husband, lying under his blanket in the temple, heard the lamp's explanations. His suspicions were cleared. When he went home, it was dawn. He asked his wife about her story and her song, but she had forgotten both of them. "What story, what song?" she said. So that's
Beautiful.
the story. And I would like to invite you all to respond. What came up for you as you heard this story?
I was very moved by the story, and for me, it says something about the silencing of women.
Same as well. What a powerful story. And I so relate to the experience even in the work with clients of many women having so many unlived lives within themselves, and the things that they have had to let go of. So very moving. Thank you so much for the story.
I also felt emotional listening to the story, a mix of anger and sadness, actually. And yes, for me, it is about the silencing of women, and the sad ending where she actually forgot the story and the song. I think that particularly felt sad.
I relate to that, Avia. I think that there is also an element of locus of control, that sense of being out of her hands. But yeah.
Thank you. My question is also, how are women supposed to be in this story? And now we're getting into the cultural parent kind of idea, but how are women supposed to be if we take the story as a kind of a script?
To me, it comes like women are supposed to be in service of others, not expressing their own needs and feelings. That's what comes to me from this story and this cultural sort of scripting.
I think
I
for
don't-
me, sorry, go ahead.
No, go Chantal.
Sorry. For me, what's curious is why she never spoke out, and then the word choked just stands out for me in the whole story, because that's quite a very particular word, and and then they're suffocating as well. So was it an impression she put on herself that she couldn't speak? Because the story doesn't start with the song, and the story wasn't suppressed. She did that to herself, in a way. That's how it seems to start. And the symptom of her husband was responding to, but what is this outside? So, and she couldn't express that because she didn't know, and she didn't even know it was a part of her. So there's almost some disassociation that there's an inner part of her that's a creative energy that she chokes and she suffocates and she doesn't let out. So even when it's out, she doesn't realize it was a part of her. That stands out for me.
Thank you.
There's something that comes to me now, is about this, the story is about a couple, yet the experience of each of them is so different, to the point that the partner doesn't even understand what the wife is going through and her song and her story. So there is that element of disconnect between the two, in a setting where you think there should be intimacy and openness and connection. So that for me is very interesting, and it's reflective of many sort of situations in society where someone erupts and the other person is completely clueless. Where did this come from?
And if I lead on from that, sorry, Priya.
Go ahead. Okay. So I was also drawn to, this unconscious aspect of her having to stay silent, like as if she doesn't own the story and the song. What was also interesting was how the story takes a form in this story, where there's a man's clothes and a man's shoes. So I'm really wondering about what that can mean for the woman and her story. What is she carrying that's being represented in the form of a man's clothing? So yeah, and the overall the ecosystem in which she lives, where she doesn't have to be told to be silent. It seems like it's a given. She's such an automatic response, right? It's coming spontaneously and organically from her. The aspect where it's disowned, her own story is disowned, and that's like really sad. And it's a collective thing, and that's my sense of it. It's not on the woman that it's being carried. That's the cultural parent, I feel. It's been carried on for ages, that the woman can't even recognize that she is carrying on a dictate which is so internalized and which is not hers.
Part that surprised me was near.
Go on, Karen.
But the part that surprised me was near the end when the husband, the lamp, said to the husband this was happening, and he went, and it seemed like he was kind and inviting, and I thought, oh, and yet she still said she didn't remember. So almost the sense of it's not in individual relationships that could be wholesome. It's bigger than that. It's the culture. It's more of what the supposed norm is, even within maybe an open, caring relationship.
Absolutely. You feel the tension of the need to connect, but it's not, it's suppressed.
Yeah. What's striking me also is that at a deeper level, the story, like all good stories, contains a moral. And the moral is if we don't speak our stories and sing our songs, we will lose them. And for me, that's also an important part of some message that is coming through in this story.
Yeah.
It also reminds me of, I think it's an African myth of a tribe which believes that everybody is born with a song. So it just reminded me of that.
Thank you. So my next question is, if we were to take this in the context of the cultural parent, and I can just quickly share, just to refresh, what if we had to map the story onto various parts of the cultural parent, and I've already sort of started a little bit, but I don't get all of it. And I'm just curious if we can do this together as an exercise and see what we would say would land up in each of these, in the etiquette, in the technicalities, in the character. What would you add, or what would you add to this list? Or am I getting this wrong? Is there another way to seeing it? Because I think Diane also opened up a very important invitation that if we lose our story, if we don't speak our stories, they get lost. So is that something that belongs in here as well?
Perhaps how what I raise could be looked at is that the storyteller is describing the cultural parent and at the same time warning us about it. And I think that is often what good stories do.
Yeah.
So I would go with your description of the cultural parent here. But the role of story is to often to wake us up, to cast light. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's purely to reinforce the cultural parent. But I think this particular story maybe does both.
Yeah. And I think that's also why I feel, and this is where I find your work interesting as well, because the different kinds of forms wake us up to different aspects of the whole. And folktales, I think, contain not only the dominant voice, but often the voice of what is excluded or suppressed or forgotten. That is the nature of folktale itself.
Yeah.
But an epic or a myth or a saga might also open up a very dominant perspective and ignore the suppressed one. So they almost seem to belong to different layers of culture or civilization in some sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the reasons I also connected with the story and I wanted to share it is because I myself feel a product of this story. It is a cultural story for me, but also because in my own family, women are constantly suppressing or ignoring their desires or vocations or gifts in order to remain as part of the status quo. And that sacrifice is very much acknowledged, but it remains there as a tension in the system. For me, this story had a great deal of meaning in also sharing it. So one my invitation now is to see if would you like to examine a story that may come from your culture, or maybe come from a culture that you live in but perhaps are not part of, and just to think about these questions, and maybe make a few notes for yourself. It can give you a few notes, time to take a few notes, and then to share this in a breakout room. Yeah. So if you have a particular story, what do you feel about this story? What emotions does it evoke in you? What emotions did it evoke in you as a child? And has that changed now? Who is the central character? Do you identify with them? Which character do you identify with? How does change or transformation happen in the story? How does that impact you? What does it reveal about the worldview you are part of? And what would it mean to rewrite the story? So maybe a few minutes, 5 minutes, just to make a few notes on these questions. And so I have 2 questions, and I'll put them both out there. And please choose to answer as whichever or whatever observations you have. How was that experience? But also, secondly, how is this different from script work? Or how do we reframe this in the context of the cultural parent?
Samhita, can you repeat that? I think I missed the question.
What came up for you in the breakout rooms when you were discussing, if you have any insights or would like to share from that experience, but also to consider how is this different, or how can we look at this differently from sort of, for example, script work?
It was very rich discussion in our group, and very powerful, actually. We came up with 2 very strong story. What was really interesting in the discussion we had is the second twist of the story. Looking at the moral is not necessarily a straightforward moral, that there is something that can be another message that can be hidden, and is how do we swallow hold of story that stays at a first degree, for example, and then the second part of it, the message, become quite pervasive. So to give an example, and I will speak only for mine, I was thinking of the story of the crying wolf, and the part of it that really that is don't lie, and there was something very strong around that. The feeling of the fear that was with that story still remain with me, and there's something like the don't tell lies. I pass on to my own children, but the underlying that really came from the discussion was also that the voice of the children is not trusted. And there is really something really deep that I've been making connection with pedophilia, and that is often happening with people that are known within the family, and how the word is not trusted. And with a story like that, it's really telling the kid, you won't be trusted if you tell the truth, and you're not sure of what, and it really it was very powerful. So the second part, so and the part of your question around the script, there is about our own script, but also what's the underlying message that is not only mine, that is that we pass on.
Thank you for articulating that, Sophia. It sounded like there was a lot of powerful and that seeing that the relationship between silencing and something like pedophilia, such a powerful connection. But also what you said, what is the underlying shared message? I mean, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at the heart at in these stories that we pass on. Thank you for naming it precisely. Yeah.
I found the discussion insightful. I was actually in the same group as Sophie and Andrew. Is that often these stories have an intended message, but we each take something perhaps different than what was intended, depending on our own personal experience, obviously. And the story that came to me was The Ugly Duckling, which is something growing up as a Black child in Lebanon in the 60s, where nobody looked like me, not even in my family. I really identified with the ugly duckling, not being liked because of the color, she was. And then how there's that idea of transformation. She becomes a beautiful white swan, and then everybody likes her. And at the time, I loved the story and I really identified with it. But the interesting thing later is this hidden systemic element where the duckling had to change from Black to white to be liked. Something around Black negative, white positive, which perpetuates the worldview and internalized racism. So for me, it's really interesting how I grew up loving it and finding it positive, and then that nuance that comes to me later, that is it really all that positive, the story? And I'm sure that was not intended, or maybe it was intended in a subtle way.
Wow, that's a powerful story to rewrite as well, given that experience. All right. Anybody else? Or I also just can move on to the next bit, which I wanted to just give a tool for examining the relationship between the story and the world and the community in terms of to see which of these three narratives, the stories that you might have looked at or the stories you might know fit into, and how does it invite other people into the story. So just sharing this. And one, I work with forms of narrative, and so there are of course many more forms of narrative than this, but one of the form that we are most used to talking about, at least in popular culture, and this is not so true of folktales, but this is very true of movies and books, and I think this is something that we call the hero's journey. And the reason I'm also bringing it up in the context of the cultural parent is because I believe that focusing on this kind of a story has led us into a culture of individualism. And the story of heroes who go against all odds and create conquest or achievement, whether it's a story that's told collectively or of movements, there's always one hero or one founder. And even as a student of transaction analysis in organizations, we're talking about that origin myth, that one founder who created an organization and seems to have powered it with their personality. So to also think about how much this kind of the structure of the story, whether it's focused on a singular figure or if it's focused on other figures, how much that also gives us a kind of message about how we act in the world, about how change is also created. The other form, and I would also invite us to go more deeply into this, but just to lay out the three forms together. The other form is something called the heroine's journey. And I think we're very familiar with the hero's journey. I think you would have all definitely seen, whether it's Star Wars or any kind of blockbuster movie, even something like Cinderella follows that kind of structure. But the heroine's journey, and I think even, and we even often think of scripts in this way, but the heroine's journey is something that's far more relational, and its origin is in kind of mother, daughter, sister stories, whether it's the story of Demeter and Persephone, which is about two women who are sort of a mother and a daughter who are separated and also have to find their way back into relationship, but a different nature of relationship, not just that of mother and daughter, but that of sort of allies or a different kind of relationship together. And that is often two people, and it's often a female journey. So I think it's also interesting that kind of in patriarchal narratives or patriarchal forms, we focused on the hero's journey, whereas something that we've often forgotten about, the heroine's journey, is told in sort of Demeter and Persephone, in Sumerian texts like the Descent of Inanna, which is Inanna coming into relationship with her own sister. So that is another paradigm of storytelling, which is less known about, which we have forgotten. And the third narrative form, or structure, is that which seems to be emerging nowadays. And I think this is something very nascent, very emergent, but it is the idea of the collective journey. And we are starting to see this in a few, television series and novels and so on. But it's the idea that actually the story is bigger than one person, and that there are multiple focal points who are all acting synchronistically, synergistically, and it's telling a bigger story as well. Yeah. So yeah, this is a lot to take in, and I've tried to, but I'm just trying to give you an overview of that. Any thoughts that come up, any responses, any insights?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if it's to everybody, but I wonder if in collectivist society we have more stories that are collective stories, like in African societies, there are more stories that involve more character versus.
So I think she got frozen for me, or is Sophie there?
Maybe how much is the cultural.
Sorry, Sophie, I think we lost you for a few seconds and I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, my internet is really bad at the moment. And the question was how much does the cultural trait, like the cultural dimension, are also influencing our frame of reference, if we want to put it in TA language.
Yeah, I don't know enough about African stories to answer that, but what little I do know, and I'm thinking back to Aboriginal stories and Native American stories as well, is that so many of the stories are about animals, actually, and their interaction with people as a whole, and the stars, and what the coming and going between animals and people and star world and real and human world. So I'm imagining that that's a much more collective perspective. Whether there are also individual hero stories or not, I'm sure there must be some, but that's my experience of the stories that I do know.
And I think as you're saying that, what also strikes me is that in those stories, there is a relationship where nature is not just an other, or there is we see ourselves in relationship to nature or the existence of the natural world.
Yeah.
It's a different worldview that is part of those stories, of that collectivist.
Yeah. Something else, if I must just say, that struck me with the previous two stories that we heard is how we need to listen to stories at so many levels. I mean, even the first one you gave us, there's so many levels and layers to the story. And as we know from Byrne, it's the psychological level that's going to determine the outcome. And that really struck me with the two stories that people shared. what was the psychological level? And there may be many, there may be a cultural level, a personal level, and so on within the story. Fascinating.
And how do we look at stories in that way? Do we just look at them into there's the psychological level, the personal meaning that's made, the larger meaning that's shared and created by a culture, and also how do those meanings connect with each other? Yeah.
I'm also imagining how when you'd shown the screen, there was hero, heroines, and the collective. So I'm also imagining how there may probably be a concentric circle, one within the other, clusters of story, and how the dynamics of each other could impact the other, like a ripple maybe. I'm also imagining it like a spiral, how one feeds the other, and what could therefore emerge from it, a collective identity or a personal identity. I'm just wondering where that would go. So it's really interesting to also see how the placement or the position will also matter. The context, the times, the place, all of that, I think is also something that we account for. So that's what came to me.
Thank you. That's a very rich comment, and now I think is the moment where I can skip ahead and show you something that can you see this? Sorry. Yeah, if you can see this, this is also from Diane's Spiral Dynamics. And I'm also wondering if when I introduced this idea of the hero, the heroine, the collective journey, and what Priya, you were talking about it being a spiral of unfolding. We can also look at it in terms of these if we think of each of these memes and levels of different culture, how the swing between autonomy and homonymy is also happening. And Diane, since this is your work, I'm just also going to pause and say, am I getting this? Am I thinking through this in the right way? And what is, would you change or challenge or criticize any way of framing this? I think you're on mute. Yeah. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Let me hear first from you, and then I will add anything that I think, but I think I would like to hear you present it first. I'm extremely delighted to see you using it.
Yeah, so my secret hope is that you would be here. But I think what Priya was talking about, moving from a lone hero kind of a journey to the heroine's journey, which is more relational, and then finally to the collective, can be seen almost as steps or spirals of unfolding. And perhaps, and maybe the other analogy, and this is just my response to Priya's thinking, is that as we work on our own script and perhaps free ourselves from our own we have to go through that hero's journey to be able to discover the power and the ability for our own transformation. But once we do that, we are called into relationship with others. So not only does our change, do we now have we changed, but if we are to remain in belonging with others, with our community, our change impacts others. So a daughter's journey towards, for example, reclaiming herself may also impact her mother. There are two ways of responding to that. She can completely separate and be the lone hero forever and not associate with her mother, for example, hypothetically, or her journey can trigger a reciprocal journey in her mother. For example, in the story of Demeter and Persephone. And that might be another way of sort of collective belonging. And then the third is when this happens on a larger level, on a collective level. So in some ways, I think what you were also talking about in the spiral of culture, when we are moving from one end, which is autonomy, to homonymy, we might cycle through these kinds of different narratives. And we might need to come back eventually to the hero's journey again to reclaim also a strong individual aspect. But in terms of each of these, the different levels of the spiral dynamics, a hero's journey more associated with the power or the red meme. And as we move into community, a heroine's journey might be more, or a collective journey might be more the story of community, the community level, when cultures ascend to that.
Mm.
Yeah. I know it's also complex, but and maybe I've also tried to put too much material in here, but I think also how do we carry stories and tradition with us and reframe them and retell them? Because I think
Yeah.
one of the struggles for me as an Indian and an Indian living in a modern, postmodern world is I have my roots come from my myth and culture. But how do I retell these stories in ways that allow them to accept the parts of me that also come from modernity and my experience of it? How do I retain my relationship with tradition, but how do I also let myself have agency? Integrate those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, these are wonderful questions. And if I think you may be being a little bit too prescriptive about where exactly they fit.
Yeah.
In the sense that you've just said it yourself now, it's not the story itself, but it's how you tell the story that will be in the style of, or in the form of, wherever you are on the tier. So the Mahabharata would be down in the traditional block, very much moving into a hero's journey, moving from the traditional into the individual hero. So that's how. But look how it was rewritten as a political, as the great Indian novel, which was much more about family relationships, almost political and family. So I think that's the key. And I would see the very communal stories, very community stories, being much earlier down in the spiral, like I'm talking about our early ancestors and their stories about animals in the world and so on. That's very much a community story. And it precedes finding community again later on. So I think the way you're thinking is certainly moving between autonomy and homonymy in the stories is very useful, but you may be putting them too specifically on bits of the spiral. I think that's my view, but see what others think.
I have a question or a reflection. Looking at your the last sort of diagram you showed us, is it connected to things like the hashtag #MeToo and Black Lives Matter, for example, because they do start with individual stories, the hero or the heroine, and then it becomes a collective movement. Is it? I don't know why it comes to me when I'm looking at your depiction.
So I have no answer to that, but I think what you've spotted on is something that might really be present, and that's such a valuable insight and reflection. I think you've just articulated something that I never thought of, but might very much be true as well.
Okay. Thanks.
And do you think that's useful in also for us to know in the way that we tell stories, and the way that we're hoping to shape movements and change?
You're asking me, sorry?
Yes.
Well, looking at what's happening in the world, I think these stories definitely matter and do shape change. I mean, from one individual story, we had a huge change, and whether it's Me Too or Black Lives Matter, and more is happening as well. So yeah, I think these stories definitely matter and are important to be told and shared. And
yeah. And I think what you're saying exactly, Black Lives Matter and Me Too are examples of collective journeys. It might start with one story, but it's triggering everyone to come out and bring out their own story in a very powerful way.
Mm-hmm.
I think I like the idea of what you have drawn from the individual to the collective. And the collective for me is a very tricky space. Like a recent example is the whole tension between India, Pakistan that's going on, right? So for me, the question that really came up as I was hearing what you were saying is, whose story are we living? Like, is it my story? And is it my story? And do I have the agency to write it in the way that I want? And therefore, does it impact the collective? Or am I taking on someone's story which has been passed down? Or, I'm assuming that's the story that we have to live, because there's group halo, there's group bias. We're always living in a place of participation mystique. So that differentiation, I think, is also very important. So an anchor that I would place is it my, physis that I'm focused on, or am I wanting to do the homonymy aspect? Is that my focus? What is the end goal, or what is the outcome? Not from a linear manner, but what's something that I'm channelizing my efforts and energies on. So if this clarification is there, I feel that all of us will have some manner in which we'll want to revisit this.
As I tried to reflect on that, something that came up for me was you are saying, how do we receive these stories as well? And I remember at the beginning, Karen had mentioned the relationship between the cultural parent and the learning imagos of Trudy Newton. And I'm wondering if that also has a place in thinking through this, whether the learning imago, how do we receive the story, whether it's something we just received or we're responding to the story awakens something in us, or is it teaching us, is the story holding us as a structure for our own growth? I'm wondering, Karen, do you think we can see it in those lenses as well?
What it's making me think about is, I think it's almost, do our stories get competitive? Can we, do we get into either or story? So it's my story or your story that is more relevant, or can it be a both and? And maybe that also, I know I'm not answering your question directly, Sam, but also maybe that goes to what you were saying, Guy, lower down on the spiral, it would be very either or, I'm right or you're right. If I'm right, you're wrong. But when we get up into second tier thinking, it can be actually there's truth and reality in everybody's story. I think linking it to the learning embargoes is a way of thinking around how do people experience learning. We claim we're using an approach which lies maybe more in the etiquette and the technicalities, but what's the actual felt experience? So in a sense, there's that link to how do we receive the story, and is our felt experience in synergy with more of the cultural parent, or does it prompt us to actually want to create a new story if that's not our lived experience? I guess it's always the individual and the collective of the time. How do we hold that tension?
Thank you for sharing. I feel like we're grappling with some very complex thoughts, and it's at that point of how do we digest this and make sense of this and perhaps use it. My next question is also, how is this discussion useful to us as in our lives, in our practice, and the things that we might do? How is thinking about this of use?
The thing that comes to mind for me is how important it is for us to question and not just take things at face value, to think deeply, to question things in order to bring about change on many levels. Like when I started, I said to you something about illness and disability being shameful in many cultures. And how this cultural story gets passed from generation to generation as the norm. If you don't stop and look at it and say, hang on a minute, is this okay? Can we look at it differently? Can we reframe it? Nothing ever changes. Yes, that curiosity and openness and questioning and looking at different angles of something is so important in us as human beings than to just swallow something and go along with it.
Thank you, Ramya. And maybe this is also a moment for us to see how we can put this all together, or see how we can digest this by looking at the story that we first spoke about in the breakout rooms, whichever story that it might have been. And I'll put a list of questions, but these questions are just prompts for thinking. Please go about this however way you want. But how might you rewrite these stories? And I think, for example, Ravia or Sophie's example of how do we reframe the kind of meaning that is carried in these stories, whether it's a preference of how it links, color links to racism, or whether it is about silencing and pedophilia. How might we, knowing this, being the kind of cultural environment of these stories being told now, how might we choose to rewrite these stories? Yeah. Or do they inspire new stories? Is that an exercise we could do? Yeah. So I've got a series of questions that I can share just to help think through these in case it's useful, but please feel free not to go by these questions at all and go with whatever is just coming up for you. But maybe if you can take 10 minutes in silence, and I think we're small enough that we can share it in this instead of going into a breakout room, but maybe answer these questions or think through how we might retell these stories, and we'll bring it back here in 10 minutes. Yeah? Okay, is it a good time to connect now? Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Sophie. So just
I don't have a full control of this, sorry.
I saw those number of magic thumbs go up. Would anyone like to share a little bit of how what that exercise was like for them? If not, I can share because I did that as well. And I would when Sarah and Diane and I were in the breakout room, I was talking about the story that was significant for me, which is the story of the Mahabharata, which is this great war that breaks out between two sets of cousins fighting over a kingdom, who gets the chance to rule the kingdom. And for me, since the time I was a child, that because I was an Indian who grew up in Pakistan, those cousins, each side was one side was Indian, one side was Pakistan, and I was the child who was trapped in the middle. So I would retell the story from the view, and I've done a lot of work on this particular story, and I've realized we've forgotten a character who comes at the end of the story. And he is a child who is half human and half serpent. He's half Naga. And it's not a story we know, we've forgotten, but it's there in quote unquote the original text. And he stops a new war from breaking out between the descendants of the Pandavas who fight the war and win it, and the Nagas who have sought revenge for their people who have died in the war. And he's a child of both lineages, half human, half serpent, half Naga, and he manages to stop this. He too is a kind of an orphan, and the person who's fighting the war, who is leading the army to avenge the death of his father, is an orphan. So they connect, and despite being on different sides, they have that connection, and the war is stopped because of this boy rushing out and saying, don't kill my family, and being from both. So for me, that is a story, and it's a heroine's journey because it's about two characters also connecting on their journeys. And I feel it's important because I would tell it not just I would tell it to my younger self who felt caught between those two things, but also I think in the present time that we're just living in, of war, and for the future, to say that war is not always does not heal any wounds it just perpetuates them. So that was the story that I came up with. And reason I shared it was I hope someone would share their story. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to. You go ahead, Rabia.
No, no,
Curious about yours.
I found the exercise difficult in relation to thinking also of the story I brought, because it's like, first I was thinking, now what was the intended message of the ugly duckling? What is it really? And there are so many, I don't think it's only one. So there was an element of feeling what's different, for example. And that the ugly duckling changed, for that fear to dissipate, and how to change the story where the ugly duckling doesn't have to change, doesn't have to do anything, doesn't have to carry that burden actually. And then maybe the others can change their perception of something that's different. And how do I bring this about? It is just really quite a complex thing, but that's how far I got. It got me thinking. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that, Rabia. I mean, I feel that's so powerful to think, not I don't have to change, but can others change? That's such a powerful question. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually found that quite fun to do and quite engaging, and potential for more thinking. I think that in the story that I brought, there is an element of that child being there is the child and there is the villagers or parents, and that are together, and the child is very alone, and then there is the wolf, and the wolf is like quite aside, not characterized as the wolf. But, there is so much assumption, and in the reframe of it, and I'm really thinking of the child finds someone. There becomes more of an heroine story, but someone that he can talk to, and talks about his fear and about the wolf, and being able even to describe the wolf, and that power of being able to talk, to say how he sees the wolf, and being trusted. And the end of the story is they kill the wolf, of course. It's not the child that gets eaten, but it's the wolf that's got trapped or bitten or eaten. But there is something that really a shift from the power to be able to talk to be trusted, to be listened to being able to name who's the.
Thank you. That's very powerful.
I think, yeah, it quite for me.
Okay. So
I didn't actually spend much time on my story. I sort of felt I was sort of a bit done with that, because I'd gone off in other areas of my mind on what other people had talked about. There were two things that came to me. One is that I remember Jean Ilsley Clark saying that the people who write the stories shape the culture. And so it's really important to be aware of who is putting the stories out, and what are the nature of the stories, and what kind of stories are we sharing that shape the culture. That was part of it. And then the other was that what will allow people to ask questions about their own cultural parent, and when will they not? And it seems to me when people are most afraid or insecure, they'll be least willing to question the cultural parent, and most likely to huddle around together and cling to the old cultural parent if they feel under threat or whatever. And I don't know how many of you are aware of it all about Trump and our South African refugees that are being taken to America with given grants and all kinds of stuff at a time when USA is saying no. And these are Afrikaans people from South Africa with a very strong cultural parent from way back from the Anglo-Boer War that says we are an oppressed people. We are chosen by God to keep a particular racial purity and truth, and we will manage only if we stay together and don't ask too many questions about or change anything. So there's such a strong cultural parent that is really being played out for us very visibly in South Africa. It's not accepted by a lot of South Africans, but it's by many. And it's being manipulated. That's the other thing, I think, is once we are in our cultural parent, as collectives, we can be manipulated more easily by those in power. And so that's another aspect that makes me very interested in how we deal with cultural parent when it shows up like this, and how safe people need to feel in order to question it. That, just some thoughts.
Thank you. Those were so rich. And I also got a sense that it's almost like in times of these war, when there is war fear, or when the group boundaries grow stronger, it is almost like our individually collapses and we just end up embodying the cultural parent, so to speak. Thank you. Thank you for that. It was very thought-provoking.
So for me, I think I found myself doing multiple iterations of the rewriting or the rescripting. A couple of things that I was reminded of when I was doing that is, one is the pen is definitely mightier than the sword. And there's a very popular quote from the movie Spider-Man where he talks, this is about, with power comes responsibility. So I was so in touch with that sense of, being attracted towards a very ideal version of what the story should be. And what I caught myself feeling was a multiple set of feelings, actually. And and that's when I think I was introspecting on which feeling is actually writing this story. So when it was about the anger, I found myself writing something very different. When I was in touch with a sense of, fear, it was a very different story. When it was from the child state, I didn't know if it was the decontamination or the deconfusion. So I feel that there is a lot of process to be attended to. And therefore, the one thing that I wanted to hold was a sense of being very mindful of where the story is headed to. And to therefore bring myself back into the story. So I think that's the process that I went through as I was, doing the exercise that you had shared. And just as a conclusion for me, it was about, the whole aspect of writing the story is not a one-point thing. I think it's a very continuous process, like our own journey of individuation. So it means that we bring both our thinking and feeling into it. So that's where I reached at the end of it.
And thank you for bringing that individuation, thinking, feeling, integration into this as well. Yeah. Very powerful. Okay. I was wondering, would it be all right as we sort of wrap up, and I think we have about 20 minutes left, if I might share another story with you, and then we can see how you respond, and if that also gives us a way of digesting whatever meaning we can make of this, of the last of this experience together. And this is actually not from, it is an Indian story, but it is not my culture, so to speak. It's a story from another culture, but I find it, sorry, I have to move this so I don't see. Yes. It is, I find it a very powerful story. A poor widow lived with her 2 sons and 2 daughters-in-law. All 4 of them scolded and ill-treated her all day. She had no one to whom she could turn and tell her woes. And as she kept all her woes to herself, she grew fatter and fatter. Her sons and daughters-in-law now found that a matter for ridicule. They mocked at her for growing fatter by the day and asked her to eat less. And one day, when everyone in the house had gone out, she wandered away from home in sheer misery and found herself walking outside town. There she saw a deserted old house. It was in ruins and had no roof. She went in and suddenly felt lonelier and more miserable than ever. She found she couldn't bear to keep her miseries to herself any longer. She had to tell someone. So she told all her stories of grievances against her first one to the wall in front of her. As she finished, the wall collapsed under the weight of her woes and crashed to the ground in a heap. Her body felt lighter. Then she turned to the second wall and told it all her grievances against her first son's wife. Down came the wall, and she grew lighter still. She brought down the third wall with her tales against her second son, and the remaining fourth wall too, with her complaints against her second daughter-in-law. Standing in the ruins with bricks and rubble all around her, she felt lighter in mood and lighter in body as well. She looked at herself and found she had actually lost all the weight she had gained in her wretchedness. Then she went home. So I just shared that as to sort of, in the beginning, I talked, the story was about a woman who suppressed her voice. And in this one, the woman is actually sharing her voice, even if it is to a house. So the change it can just do for the self. Any thoughts or anything coming up?
So this might not be connected, but for me, I don't like the underlying message around fat being negative and thin being positive.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how it's connected to the story, but that's the thing that came to me. And when we think of anorexia and bulimia in the world, I find that disturbing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's also very valid, that it's in some ways a liberating story, but it's also operating in another kind of a framework. And this is also what we can speak of as a culture, where there is a certain binary, there is a certain value system, which is very problematic.
Yeah.
Sam, for me, I think there's a book called The Body Holds the Score. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of that book. And I think what rising above everything else, I think recognizing that our bodies are also emotional storehouses. And if we don't express the things that trouble us, they will manifest in illness and suppression and whatever is inside of us that is not of us, but things that we are not either acknowledging, embracing, dealing with, will find a way out. And if it doesn't find a way out, we become, in a way, we become the targets of our own pain in some sense, if we're not processing it and finding expression for it. And once we release it, I think the physical walls of the house is also, in some sense, the emotional, spiritual walls that she felt around her, not able to express and release. I'm not sure her sons and her daughter-in-laws in that instance would have actually understood what she said, because to be able to express something, one does assume that the other person is going to understand. And in most stories, there are 1,000 interpretations to any one, expression that we make. So she spoke out into an inanimate wall, and that physical breaking was also a breaking inside of herself, releasing herself. So I found that quite powerful.
And the house is a mirror, absolutely, all of what you said, Chantal, and the house is kind of a mirror of her own self. The identity that sort of keeps her in as being a widowed and dependent on her family who doesn't care for her. Yeah.
Yes, I loved the story and all the metaphors of the story, of her shedding the weight that she was carrying, not necessarily physical, but all the weight. And the walls that hemmed her in. And then I was also noticing the potentially destructive power of her voicing, which is probably what she feared in the first place, but could be usefully used in the house. And the only thing I would like to change is the last line. Instead of her going home to all that, I would like her to go into the woods nearby and build a house for herself.
Yeah, that would be very powerful. Yes, I like that one. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's interesting to see how also stories have the good and they're complex. There are moments of liberating power in them, but there are also at the same time the same beliefs and value systems and often returns that can also hold us back. So they carry both potentials. Yeah. And I think that's also what is, for me, sometimes what we lose out with written culture is the ability to transform these stories in the telling for the audience, in relationship with the audience. Okay. So since we've got, I think, about 15 minutes left, and it's sort of a good place, I just wanted to get a sense from everyone what they might be taking back from this that will help me understand and perhaps also help others understand what they might have taken or what they're not taking back, and if also challenge and say this was not such a useful thing. That's also good feedback for me to hear.
I'll go
Sita,
first,
I think.
if it's okay, Andrew. For me, this was very rich, and I did not necessarily understand everything. I have to admit, but I feel that I'm growing listening to all of you, and I thank you for all the insights and different cultures and cultural biases I got this morning. And I know this is going to help me to think about my own journey and my own biases and my own perceptions of things. I also know there are many, many more things I have to learn. The things you shared when you shared your screen are very interesting for me. So I will go dig deeper into that too. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, and Samhita, from my side, I really enjoyed your use of story and prompting us to work with them. The thing that's really struck me at the end that you said was about stories being captured in text, and recalling that in many traditions it's oral traditions and stories were shared in together, and thinking about just how much more dynamic that could have been in that experience. I'm sure like no one telling is identical to the next, and no audience is identical to the next, and that leaves me with quite a tickled feeling of maybe that's the part of the community in myths and fables that I'm like craving, the ability to be a listener, but also an engaged party in the exercise. Thank you for today.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for that.
I've really enjoyed the exploration and the session, both on a personal level for myself and also collectively, sharing collectively our thoughts about this topic. It reinforces my belief of the power of stories, and not to take them face value and really look deeply at the many messages that they carry, surface and hidden. Thank you very much for the session. I really found it very, very insightful.
Thank you, Rabia.
Yeah, I equally feel quite inspired by the the work we've done this morning and excited. I often look for opportunity to bring approaches that are maybe more talking to the audience that I work with. And in Kenya, the place of story is important. So, I mean, with your permission, and I will reach out directly to you to see how I could bring that into even my TA 101 on introducing script through story. I think it will be something that will work very well. So yeah, maybe reach out to you with some more ideas.
Thank you, Sophie. I'd love to help with that. That would be an absolute joy. And I'll just pop my email in the chat if anyone wants to reach out. Yeah.
I find that in TA 101 it's not always easy to bring it's such a big thing, the script, or maybe it is big for me, so that's why I find it difficult to make it palatable. But I think that doing it playfully and using the storytelling will be really interesting. So yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. It's been an amazing journey. And the richness together in the room that you've invited us to explore. And what I'm leaving with is interesting. There's almost there's a sense of a tinge of sadness that story has never been important or evident in the way that I see it is in other cultures. In my family, in my culture, I'm not sure, maybe in South Africa, we're such a diversity of traditions and cultures. It's hard almost as a white South African to find what my culture is. And I'm thinking of, you know, my grandchildren and what might be the stories that could emerge. So I'm leaving really pleasantly provoked and thoughtful about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. This was so enriching. So alongside the insights, I think I'm also left with a lot of questions for reflection. And I loved how you factored space for, you know, sharing and introspection and collective sharing. So that was also a very different experience. One of the other things that I was thinking about is how it would have been different if I had witnessed and participated in this, say, in India, in the same homogeneous culture versus how it was in a heterogeneous multicultural space. So that's also something that I'm taking back. And I loved the stories that you curated. And interestingly, the last story, for some synchronous reason, I'm coming across this for the second time this week. Just 2 days back, it was the same story. So I'm wondering what the message is for me personally. So that's also something that I'm taking back. So thank you.
Thank you, Priya. That's not an accident then for you. Okay.
Thank you, Sam, sorry. Sophia, would you want to go ahead?
You go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam, for the time and for sharing, and for everybody else on the call as well that shared. I'm totally new to all of this. I haven't done my TA 101 yet, but that is on the cards to do with Karen at some point. But I think what really struck me is the heroine collective journey and story. I think that really resonated with me. I think my favorite story, and I said it in the group, that always incensed me, is the Tess of the Doveable story, where she's, you know, made to be this sacrificial, either by choice or by circumstance, a sacrificial lamb upon a cold slate in an English countryside. And I think most women are most women I've come across in processes of change end up being that. You pour yourself out until there's nothing left. But even if you had a choice, you would still pour yourself out completely. So I think the story of change always starts with a solitary person. But to drive change, there does need to be a relationship, and there does need to be a collectivism around that as well. So that's really something I took away. And I think also I hadn't known of Diane's work on spiral dynamics, so I Googled a little bit while we were chatting. But I think perhaps for me what resonates is that you're always going to spiral from lone to relational to collective and back. It's going to be a constant process, because I think ultimately the journey of change is a lonely journey. We do it in partnership perhaps with others, and they contribute to it, but it's a lonely journey fundamentally. So I also relate to what Karen said about sadness. I don't think we tell ourselves, maybe I speak for myself more specifically, I need to reflect a lot on what my story is, especially at this juncture in my life. So thank you for creating the space, and thanks to Diane for prompting me about this call. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you. Okay.
I wanted to add just one thing, Samhita. I really enjoy the illustration. I know you use AI to prompt them, and I think it's but after it's your choice in what is proposed. And I find it they were beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah. And thank you all. It's been really wonderful to have this experience with you, and for all of you to share yourselves so deeply and so thoughtfully as well. So thank you for just being here, and for me it was such an enriching experience to do that and to think through things with others. I also, again, what Chantal just said about being alone, relational, collective, I can do some of this thinking alone, but it really fertilizes, it really it comes to completion when I can share it and get back and hear from others. So thank you for that opportunity.
Okay. And I've chosen to go last. Am I last? Has everybody spoken? Am I on cue, Karen? On behalf of SATAA, as one of the founders of it, and long-standing presence here, to thank you very, very much. I thought you did a beautiful presentation, so interesting, and my thoughts were provoked all over the place, and I will go back to the spiral and look some more as well. Are you going to be in at the ITA World Conference?
No, I will not.
No, you're not, because I'm going to be presenting it there, and I thought how fun if you were going to be there too and we could interact. But we'll interact in other ways, because I would like to do that some more with you. And so very warm thanks for giving us your time, your skill, and your very lovely presence today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you, Diane, for your generosity and also allowing me to interpret your work.
It's out there. Use it.
Thank you, everyone. It's been lovely to have this time with all of you. Quick plug, SATAA is a very small member-run organization, and we're very passionate about having more of this engagement to get the word of TA out there. So if it appeals to you, please consider joining as a member if you're not already. And this recording will be put on our YouTube channel, and we'll send an email to all of you to let you know when it's up and running on that side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Be well.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.